What's up, BeatStars fam? It's your boy Attorney Cal here, and we're back. I'm so excited today to be back here with you all. It feels like it's been a minute, but we definitely about to get into some really cool things and talk about some very important topics. Record labels and music publishers. I know a lot of people have their idea of the importance of record labels, the importance of music publishers, but I want to break it to you all, make it so simple for you all to understand, and also just kind of go and dive into it. So without that, without further ado, let's do some shout outs. I just want to kind of shout out all my people. I see Eighth Life, what's going on? Whoa, Rasa Hoodie and looks professional. I appreciate that. Trying to do a little something, mix it up. We got Nicholas Anderson 11, Attorney Cal, what's going on? Who else we got in here? Eighth Life, thank you. Bufo, what's going on? Let me see what else we got. Low Wave Productions 50/50, what's going on? Let's see. Wolf Beats, what's good? And let me see who else we got. Chris Kane Music, and let me see what's going on. Let's see. And we got K-Bot. What's going on? So for everybody that's here now, everybody that's new here, first of all, I just want to say my name, I go by Attorney Cal. One of the things that we do here at Protect Your Art is we kind of talk about, how to protect your art, how to put you in a good position to be able to understand the music industry. So just as a catch-up, because I know we got a lot of people coming in, some of the things that we talked about thus far: intellectual property, copyrights, trademarks, sound recordings, music publishing, some of the most important terms you should put in the agreement, some of the most important agreements you should understand. And we've also talked about some very key things as it pertains to just overall building yourself as a person in this industry, right? It's very critical and very important that you protect your art at all costs. Protect your art at all costs. And with that being said, we have some announcements. We'll get to those towards the end. But what I want to do is I want to go ahead and jump right into it so we can kind of talk a little bit more about record labels and music publishers. So let's pop it off. I'm going to share my screen, and then we'll be able to get started. All right, everybody can see my screen. And here we go. Here's our first little video. So this is talking about the most important agreements you should know. What's a work for hire agreement? This is super important. A lot of times, not only do you have your producer licenses where you're doing it non-exclusive, or you have an exclusive licenses, but now you're getting in a situation where, look, you done sold all these non-exclusive licenses, you're booming. You done sold all these exclusive licenses, and you're really booming. And now they're knowing your name. They're seeing Bufo on the beat everywhere. And they're like, look, bro, I need that thing for myself, man. I need to own that master. Now, I don't want to own it just as a non-exclusive where I can use it. I don't want just to be the only one. I want to own this beat. Likely what happens in that situation, they'll say, look, I want you to sell me this beat, but at this point, you're a work for hire. What does that mean? A work for hire essentially means that you're transferring your ownership in that master or that sound recording of that beat over to the person and agreeing, hey, I work for you to create this, and now that property is becoming yours. So if you're having a non-exclusive license or an exclusive license where you're just exclusively licensing that beat to them, then work for hire should not be in that agreement. So if it's your understanding, look, I'm just licensing this beat to you, work for hire should not be in that agreement. So if it's only your intention to license that beat over, if you see work for hire or transferring 100% ownership, you should look and say, nah, this is something about this isn't right. Let me go back to this episode and look at the difference between a non-exclusive and an exclusive producer license and a work for hire agreement. So what you always have to look for is look, is there a sale taking place? Am I transferring ownership? Is that my intention to transfer ownership? Okay, this is likely going to be a work for hire agreement. So it's super critical when you're going in and you're looking and you're seeing all of the different things to make sure that you're understanding the value of my producer license, which is a non-exclusive, or an exclusive, which is what you're selling through the platform, Hey, you can use this for a specified amount of time, but other people can use it, non-exclusive. Hey, you can be the only one that uses this, but the other people that have already used it can still use it, exclusive, or work for hire agreement. Look, I know you really like this beat. Give me 5,000. You own the master to this beat. I still own, my publishing, which I'm going to register with BeatStars Publishing. But you control the sound recording, which we talked about in the beginning, and I'm gonna work for hire. Very critical, very important. And as a business, as the owner of your intellectual property, which is your real estate, you have to know enough and pay attention enough. That's why I tweeted something. Stay focused, pay attention. Pay attention and stay focused. Because you have to understand, and it's good to have people on your team, because you have to be able to understand when to navigate these three, right? You have to be able to understand, look, I can sell a non-exclusive here. I can sell an exclusive here. Or I can do a work for hire agreement and sell this beat. And that's gonna put me in a good place. So always be paying attention and staying focused, looking for opportunities, but understanding when to use what tools, because that's all we're doing here. Okay, perfect. So essentially what that's talking about, and I'll stop sharing for a minute. What that's talking about is putting you in a position to where you understand, right, what you're getting into, no matter what agreement, no matter what's going on. And one of the things that I think is really, really cool and what I want to talk about here today is I was watching an interview, and one of the things that I saw was an interview with 21 Savage, right? And he was talking about how when he first got involved in the music industry, one of the things that was super important to him was understanding the value of what he had going on. So he said he came up with a bunch of people, right? So I'm from Atlanta, born in Augusta, Georgia, but raised in Atlanta area. So I was around when 21 Savage was popping off, the Migos was popping off, Young Thug was popping off, Lil Baby was popping off. So you saw a revolution of all these artists which are currently running the music industry right now. And one of the things that 21 Savage said was he went into his deal and his label with a platinum album. What does that mean, Attorney Cal? He understood that he had leverage. The reason why that's important for me and for you all to understand is by putting in all this work on the BeatStars platform, understanding, all of the things that you need to know, whether it's music publishing, whether it's, understanding the value of a record deal, whether it's understanding how your marketing works, how your ecosystem works. You're already going in and having so much leverage. So it's important that you understand, because you have leverage and you know where you're going and you know where you want to be, that you use this stuff to better yourself and to put yourself in the best situation possible. So that's always very key. That's always super important. And when you're trying to be successful, it's critical that you always think back, protect your art. And one thing that we say here is that your intellectual property is no different than a piece of real estate, right? So when you got all of this real estate, you got all of these things that you're doing, that you're coming up with, these ideas, these beats, these concepts, all of these different things, it's super important for you to make sure that when you're coming up with these ideas and these concepts, you're using what you've learned to protect these things. So always protect your art. Always, always, always make sure that you understand the value of what you're getting into, where you're going. And yeah, that's super, super critical. So now we'll get into the next thing we'll talk about is our actual PowerPoint, the slide, the things that we'll go through today. So let me share screen again here. And if you all have questions, definitely let me know and I'll jump back in and answer them. I'm gonna get into this. If you want to follow along with what I use the learning guide, the same exact thing that you all have. So that's beatsstars.world/protect.your.art or /your-art. So basically, when you go in and you're looking at beatstars.world, just go to the Protect Your Art page, and you can definitely download everything that I'm using, because that's what I'm talking to you about. Let's answer a couple questions. It seems like to me, a work for hire is from people who want to steal your publishing rights, usually bigger labels. I could be wrong, but exclusive is a much better way to go. So that's a great question, right? Your work for hire agreements, essentially, why these are key is because what they'll look like is, say you're this big artist or big producer, and you cooking up and you're doing all these things on the platform. You're selling licenses, right? Non-exclusive and exclusive, which we talked about. But at a certain point, now you got labels reaching out, you got all these different people reaching out, and they want to use your actual work for placement. So say they want to come in and they say, hey, you know, G Life, I want to use your work for a placement. We want work for hire, right? We want to be able to own the master, which is common, right? That's generally common when it comes to larger fees. So it's like, oh, we want to own the master. So now they're saying they want to own the master. However, when assigning that master or doing a work for hire agreement, because essentially that's what it is, now you're basically saying, even though you own the master, I want to exclude the underlying composition. So that goes back to your question, right? There's a way to do a master or do a work for hire agreement, but still maintain ownership of the publishing in the original beat and in the new work. Once your original composition, right, the master and the underlying composition is combined with the artist or whoever else it is getting on that track, you're still able to maintain ownership of the publishing of the other work, and you're also able to receive publishing or ownership of that composition in a new work, right? So it's very, very critical that when you're looking at these agreements, whether they're work for hire or not, you're still maintaining the underlying composition of that work. So you're saying excluding, right? You're excluding that composition from that assignment of the work for hire. And you're making sure that when the new track comes out, when all the artists, all the collaborators, the feature artists, producers, including yourself, that you're receiving the publishing from that new work. So exclusives are a good way to go. Non-exclusives are a good way to go. And sometimes, depending on your situation, a work for hire may actually make sense, right? So you just got to think about that. And once you look at it, you know, in that perspective, that's something that you could definitely consider. Any more questions on that before we jump in? Okay, let's do it. Let me share my screen and let's get into it, right? Share screen, and we're gonna go here. Okay, so we already talked about work for hire agreements, right? Now we're gonna get into a little bit of the nitty gritty. Basically, we're talking about the most important agreements you should understand, right? So those are your producer licenses, your work for hire agreements, your recording agreements, your publishing agreements, and your management agreements. Now, that's not a exhaustive list. I mean, those are some of the main things that you want to try to understand, because they're in the areas in which most people generally work in. These are the key things that are kind of some of the things you're encountering first, right? So your non-exclusives, and just like G Life said, your exclusive licenses. Of course, you want to make sure you understand those. Work for hire agreements. That's if you're doing something in a beat sale and they want all of the rights exclusively and they want to own, have ownership. Your recording agreements, the royalty deal, joint venture, licensing deal, and then your publishing agreement, right? Co-pub and pub admin. And then last is management agreements. So I saw questions about management agreements. We'll talk more about that a little bit later. But those are some of the things that you all kind of want to make sure you understand, right? So what we're doing today is we're talking about record labels and music publishers. So on the left, those are your record labels. So you got all of your record labels. This is not a exhaustive list, but it's just, some of the main things places you're looking for, right? And then you got music publishers. But of course, BeatStars is aligned with Sony Music Publishing, the #1 music publisher in the world. The biggest, the best, so that's why I put them there, right? Okay, the purpose of Protect Your Art. The purpose of this course is to introduce students to legal, business, creative aspects of the entertainment industry. Entertainment law consists of a broad array of core legal issues combined with relationship issues that relate to producing and protecting entertainment products and talent. For all of you all that are new here, this right here comes directly from my law school class. I took a class on copyright law, right? But it was more so like entertainment law because it was like all encompassing. We talked about all different things, right? We talked about all of the things that matter as it pertains to music publishing, right? As it pertains to copyrights, intellectual property, lawyers, managers, and agents. All of these different things that coexist and work together in the entertainment industry. And the purpose of Protect Your Art, right, is to kind of just give you a piece of all of them, but make sure that you kind of have a basic and underlying knowledge, right? So you can build on it, right? So we want to talk to you a little bit about, okay, yeah, you understand everything as far as your marketing and setting up your page and doing all of these things, and you're a great producer. But what happens now when you want to go into artist mode and record labels come, or when, you know, a management deal comes, or when lawyers start reaching out, or you reach out to a lawyer. Like, what are some of these things that are key? And how do you protect your art at the end of the day to make sure that you're, you know, able to grow and do things? So that's essentially all this is. It's just basically showing you, look, this is how you protect yourself, protect your art, and just put you in a position to be, you know, be able to have longevity. So, like I said, you know, we're talking about record labels and music publishers. If you would like to follow along, because this is just the PowerPoint, if you want to use the actual handout to follow along with what I'm doing with your BeatStars learning guide, that's beatstars.world/protect-your-art. Or you could just go to beatstars.world, look for Protect Your Art, and then also look for record labels and music publishers, and you'll be able to chime in and, you know, ask questions and follow along. So I'll get through this, and then we'll take some questions at the end, and then we'll also have a few announcements. First thing, right? What is the history of the record label, right? So, like, right now, what's going on is there's a lot of bad mouthing about record labels, like, quite honestly, right? Because just like, man, record labels rip people off, or they do all of this stuff, or they're negative, or they don't pay artists what they're worth, or, you know, it's just this stigma about record labels. But I think before, you know, you pass judgment in me as a person, like, I like to dig deep and figure out what's the history of record labels, right? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what's the history of the music publisher. Like, what does that consist of? What is the role of a record label? So sometimes people criticize record labels, but it depends on what their role is in your particular situation. Same thing with music publishers, right? What's the difference between a record label and a music publisher? Okay, what do they do differently? Why do I need this one? Why do I need this one? Why don't I need, you know, in the economics of the recording industry and the publishing industry. So what does that mean, Attorney Cal? Essentially, we're just gonna break down essentially who is the the best, like what type of revenue is being generated in the overall industry. Because, and the thing that I like to do that because it's very, very encouraging, so people can understand, like, the music industry, while a lot of people make it seem like, oh, it's not a great place to be, or sometimes it's hard or it's tough, but the economics of the overall industry show that the industry is growing. It's a place that you want to be, and it's also a place where if you figure out your niche, and you figure out exactly what you want to do and educate yourself about how you can do what you want to do and still protect yourself, it's a place where you can actually make a living for yourself and have a great life. So I want to get into the economics, but that'll be towards the end. First thing, the history of the record label. Let's break it down. Record labels first started in the 1800s, and this was a cool fact, right? So the common record, the way we see record labels now, right? This was started by Thomas Edison, right? The Thomas A. Edison Company. So essentially, y'all know Thomas Edison. He created a light bulb. He created a bunch of other things. And one of his first inventions, or one of the first things that he organized and formed, was a record label, right? The Thomas A. Edison Company. So then in 1920, the recording industry, you know, basically after, you know, going through where he started the first record label, there was 150 million records sold, right? So at that point, when we think about, you know, the dynamics of the music industry at that point, there's no streaming. There's no, you know, next day shipping. There's no Walmart, no Target, none of these places where people can actually go in, purchase records on a large scale, right? But even back then, 150 million records were sold in the 1920s, right? So when you think about that and you think about how powerful music is, when you subtract all of the technologies, all the different advances that we have today, almost 250 million records were sold back then. So fast forward to 1978, and now we're looking at 762 million records being sold, right? So in the span of 50 years, this number has basically a 4 times multiple, and saying now we went from 150 million records to 762 million records, right? So we're seeing like the record label is growing, right? We're starting with just Thomas Edison and his company, a few other companies. We're selling 150 million records. Then we're turning around and we're selling 762 million records. And by 2000, the industry revenues were $36.9 billion, right? So we'll break that down later in the economics, but you go from selling, you know, 150 million records to making $36.9 billion in 2000, right? And why that's very, very critical and important is because it shows you, right, for everybody that's a producer, artist, a label, somebody that's focused on getting into the music industry, but don't really understand like, how am I going to make money, or how does money work, or how do these things happen for me? The economics of the industry will show you that if $36.9 billion is being generated, there's money out there in it for you. You know, you just have to apply yourself and understand how to get to it, right? But by 2010, the revenues had fallen to $15.9 billion. And if you know why the revenues in the music industry went so high and fell, comment in the chat right now. I'll explain to you briefly. The record labels basically had this huge, path from the 1920s up to the 2000s, where they went from phono records to tapes, and then they went to CDs. So essentially, the record label was able to take everything that was already put out, put it on CDs, and this drove revenues up, right? But in the 2000s, what happened with the advent of technology, things like Napster and a lot of different other things, websites, people started to not buy music like they used to, because music was looked upon as if it was free, right? So people start illegally downloading music, right? I'm pretty sure we all have a cousin or somebody here that used to go on LimeWire or BearShare or, some of these other sites where you can go in and you can download music for free, and that caused the revenues to fall, right? So at that point, now we're looking in a situation where we're figuring out, okay, how from 2010 to 2020, revenues went from $15.9 billion to $23.1 billion, meaning the record industry, or the recording industry on the recording side of music, is going up. So revenues are going up. So here's what's important. One, technologies had advanced at this point. So what we're looking at now is we're seeing the advent of the iPhone, the advent of the iPod, the advent of the iPad, the advent of all the Samsung devices, iTunes, Google Play Store, Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. All of these different technologies have caused what people would say, the recording industry was dying, or the record label was dying, or this is dying. But all of this new technology has been advented to basically be more advantageous to a producer, for an artist, for a label, for all these different people. And now industry revenues are going up. So what is it? Why is this important? You see essentially, basically, the record label, the modern day record label, start at this place, right? It goes up, right? And then it goes down, and now it's going back up. The reason why that history is important for everybody here to understand is, once you understand how things move in markets and things like that, understanding how things go up and down and go up and down, and you pay attention to those revenues and those numbers, like I said earlier, it shows that there's a place for producers, artists, labels, managers, everybody who wants to be involved in the industry, how to get in and how to, be prosperous and be successful. You just have to understand the history and see how, okay, as more things get created, such as BeatStars, right? This platform helps those revenues go up because, essentially what's happening is a lot of people are coming onto this platform, buying you all's beats, right? And they're able to generate large records. And what that does is it adds to the bottom line of that figure. So that's super important. Next thing, the history of the music publishing. Music publishing actually started before the record label or the recording industry, right? So it started in the 15th century, right? So back in the day where people were just walking around with, when I think about it, it's like medieval times and all these different things going on back in the day. Music publishing was around. So for everybody who doesn't really understand music publishing or don't understand why it's important, if something's been around since the 15th century and it's still around, that's an obvious and clear sign that it's important and that you should, do your research on it and be involved, right? So music publishing first started in the 15th century, and the concept of music copyright began with King Henry VIII, right, to bring in more revenue. So in the beginning of when music publishing first started and music publishers first started, right, the concept of music publishing was the same as it is today. Music copyright, and to also bring in more revenue. So when you have beats that you created, like G Live asked, it seems like, a work for hire is to transfer over your music publishing. One of the cool things about understanding music publishing, like he said, he obviously understands the value with it, right? So every time a song is streamed, we talked about it on the recording side, right? Then music publishing is attached to that, right? And that creates revenue. So that in itself shows you how important this is. And it also dates back to when it first began, when music publishing and music publishers first began. The importance were to protect your compositions or your copyrights in those compositions and to drive revenue. In 1914, ASCAP was created in the United States to give more, copyright protections to composers. So what is that, right? So ASCAP is a PRO. That's one of the things that we talked about. And if you're new here, essentially a PRO is what collects those revenues, right? They're your ASCAPs, your BMIs, your CSACs, your SASM, your PRS for music. I'm trying to think of some more. All of these different PROs and CMOs around the world, therefore facing, and their job is to basically collect those revenues based on territories, and sometimes when they have deals and out in territories outside of where they originate, the country of their origin, right? So music publishing started in the 15th century. 1914, we have ASCAP. Now in 1985, we fast forward 70 years. One of the cool things that I think was very revolutionary, and it plays a major role into where things are now. Michael Jackson purchased the music publisher ATV for $47.5 million, right? So essentially what he realized is back then was the recording side was important, but the actual ownership of compositions or songs, the underlying compositions was important. And back then to pay $47.5 million for something, which people really didn't understand, right, was amazing. But it shows that he was able, and he had people around him that educated on him the history of music publishing and why it was important then and how important it will be in the future. So by 1990, music publishing revenues were in excess of $3 billion. And now by 2020, music publishing revenues were up to $4.007 billion. And fast forward now, after Michael Jackson's death, I believe he sold his stake in whatever he had, some of it, for $675 million. So he went from purchasing something in the 80s for $47 million and selling it, right, for, I don't know how many multiples, but for, $600 million plus dollars. And that shows you how the history and the trajectory and the value in things on the recording side and the publishing side only will continue to increase. So I said that to say it's super important that you understand that you stay focused and locked in on the value, because this history will show you and it will dictate the value of all of the beats that you create, all of the songs that you create, and it will only increase as you continue to work and as the value of the industry continues to grow as a whole. Super important, right? Next thing, what is the role of a record label? So we talked about the history of a record label, but what is the role of a record label? The role of a record label is to broaden the artist's fan base, market, promote all of their stuff, their albums and singles on streaming services, radio, sometimes TV, and they can also provide media coverage to broaden our artist's global reach. Let's broaden that, right? So not only are we seeing artists, right, but we're also seeing producers. We're also seeing collectives. We're seeing all of these different people come in and they're doing deals with record labels, right? And what type of deals? And if you want to go back and watch, our previous episodes, we talked about the type of deals that people generally do, right? They usually do a royalty deal where they get a percentage of the overall profits generated by a particular single, album, or compilation. They do a joint venture deal where everything is split 50-50, right? Or they do what's called a distribution deal. Essentially what that does is it allows an artist to maintain ownership of their work and pay essentially the record label a fee out of what they're generating. So as we started in the beginning, I talked a little bit about 21 Savage, right? So let's talk about him based on the history of the record label, right? So I read a book about Michael Jackson and some of the things that, when he first started out, how deals were done, right? So it talked about how, big artists back then could get a royalty or something of 14%, 5%, 10%. Well, he escalated his deal all the way up to 20 to 30%, right? So that was huge back then. Fast forward now in 2021, you watch an interview of an artist named 21 Savage, who has almost 21 million Spotify streams monthly. It's no telling how many he has on Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube. And essentially what he's saying, if you go back and watch it, he's talking about how the role of the record label has changed now. So instead of them having to do all of these things for him, he comes to the record label with the platinum album, meaning he sold over 1 million copies. And not only that, but he's basically saying, I own all my masters, and it's a 70-30 split in favor of me, right? So I said all that to say, to show, like, I know the history of record labels and taking deals and doing all these things. You know, a lot of times people hear it and it's like, oh, don't do that, or stray away from it. But one of the things that I urge you all is to educate yourself on the current role of these entities, whether it be a record label or a music publisher, in the landscape of 2021, not in the 2000s, not in the 90s, not in the early 1900s, but in the landscape of what's going on now. Because if you educate and you understand the things that they're capable of doing, it puts you in a position to where you're able to negotiate and get what you want while maintaining ownership, not having to be locked down, not losing creative control, and also putting yourself in a position to protect your art. The next thing, what is the role of the music publisher? Let's talk about it, right? Music publishers are responsible for ensuring that songwriters and composers receive payment for their compositions. They collect performance royalties, mechanical royalties, synchronization royalties, and they help you if you get your stuff in video games, films, and television, right? Why is that important? So we talk about the record label, right? The history of the record label, the role of the record label. And what we talk about is essentially at this point, the recording side, right? So that's the stuff you on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube, and all of these different things. And that puts out, you know, a royalty stream on a sound recording, all of the things that you hear. But the underlying DNA of all of that stuff that you extract is the underlying composition, right? The stuff that you as producers or songwriters or composers, that's the DNA of everything that people hear. But that DNA has a separate royalty stream, and that's where your music publishers come in. They help you copyright, right? They help you protect those copyrights in that DNA of those compositions, and then they help you create a revenue stream for those particular compositions. Take BeatStars, for example, right? So you come, you say, look, man, I got all of these songs, I got a couple placements, but I don't know as far as what I need to do, right? Like to be with a music publisher, or I want to put myself in a position to steal all my songs, right? And I also want to, be able to have some protection all around the world. One of the things that you're able to do is you're able to sign an administration deal, right? And we talked about it. So there's a co-pub deal a lot of times with music publishers. That's where it's a 50-50 split. But with BeatStars, you have admin deals, which allows you to maintain ownership of your compositions or your copyrights, right? And puts you in a position to be able to collect all of your royalties on the publishing side that come into you, right? So that's super, super key, super, super critical. And it's important to understand that because, as we said, not only how the roles on the recording side or the sound recording side grow, but the roles and the revenues on the publishing side have grown too. So by you understanding the value of those things and getting in now and putting yourself in a position to protect your art, to make sure that you understand the type of deals and different things and the roles of a music publisher in 2021, then you're able to be able to say and look back on history and say, I made a good decision, I did this, and that'll put you in a position to grow and do different things. Right? So now, our next question. What is the difference between a record label and a music publisher? I think that's super, super critical, right? Because a lot of times what happens is you'll see a lot of record labels, right? ABC Records will have ABC Publishing, right? So when you see ABC Records and ABC Publishing, what is the difference between, and if you understand, if you know, type it in the chat, the difference between ABC Records and ABC Publishing. ABC Records, like we said, that's basically on your sound recording side, right? So they're taking, basically the master or the sound recording, and they're monetizing that. They're monetizing it through album sales. We're seeing more vinyl sales, right? We're seeing things be put on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, YouTube. All of that is the recording side, and that's where ABC Records comes in, right? They help them put out those recordings and monetize those recordings. Now, ABC Publishing, what ABC Publishing does is they're protecting the things, the DNA of those recordings, which is the underlying compositions. So while ABC Records is monetizing that, they're monetizing those compositions, and making sure that every time those songs get streamed, every time a record gets sold, every time something gets radio airplay, that you're drawing music publishing in a separate revenue stream, and you're making sure that everything lines up. So not only are you generating revenue on the recording side, but you're generating your revenue on the publishing side, right? And that's super, super important. So now we want to kind of get into the economics of the music industry. So when we're talking about, you know, the economics of the recording industry and the publishing industry, one of the things I think is very, very, you know, cool is, like we talked about in the history, when you go in and you look at all of these different things, right? You go in and you look at how the revenues have grown, right? So when I think about it, you know, the recording and the publishing industry, you know, I think about, okay, music is a part of the fabric of everyone's day, right? So no matter what you're doing, you're likely to hear a song every day. So for some things, that's not true, right? It's kind of like food. It's kind of like water. It's kind of like shelter. It's kind of like clothing. It's like music is a fabric and a part of everyone's day. Why that is important is because if you go in and you look at the economics of the transportation industry, because people got to get places, the food industry, if you go in and look at the clothing industry, all of these different industries, and you look at how much revenue these different industries have generated, right? You can say, man, let's just use a random number. The fuel industry has generated $1 trillion, right? Man, I only eat once a day, but everybody else seems that, you know, they probably eat 1 or twice a day. And it says, okay, the clothing industry generates this amount of money. I only wear one outfit. Like me, I only got a couple outfits. So, you know, I only wear outfits, you know, this same outfit probably 2-3 times a week, and I got another one. When you think about that, right, if these industries are steady growing and the value of what they do as a total is in the billions, hundreds of billions, sometimes trillions of dollars, and music is a fabric and a foundation of what people do in the same magnitude. I listen to more songs than I eat food, right? I listen to more you know, songs than I eat cookies, right? Than I chew gum, or I listen to more albums, right? Or tracks than I do eat fries, right? So it's just like at a certain point, the value of music is going to get to a level where there should be no difference between an album sale, right, and something like a shirt sale or clothing or food or transportation or all of these things that are necessary for life, right? Because music is the same. So it's important that, you know, when you're getting into the industry and you're thinking about, man, how do I grow? And where are things going to be, you know, in 5 years from now? When you're trying to figure out like what you want to do and how you want to go about it, and, you know, you're balancing like, I want to do this, or I want to do that, but you're comparing and you're trying to project, just go in and look at all these different industries, where they started, right? Look at the history of these industries. Look at how much revenue was generated in these industries from the time they began and how things have gone up. And then you can cross-reference that with music and music publishing or the recording side, right? And you can say, man, in 2000, there was, you know, $36.9 billion generated. In 2010, that dropped to 15.9, and now we're back to 23.1. Estimates show essentially by 2030, this is going to be up to $75 billion, right? So you're going to see this number triple. So what does that tell me? That tells me that everybody that's, you know, locked in, that's focused on making music, if the revenues, if they're already a part of this, right, and the revenues that gonna, you know, explode the entire industry will triple 2 to 3 times, then if you're doing the same thing and growing, then logically speaking, your revenues, if you stay on the same path, work hard, do everything you're supposed to do, should do the same. So I think that's super, super critical and important for people to understand that the economics of the recording and publishing industry are no different than other markets, especially those markets that we see like food, clothing, shelter, entertainment. You know, it's a part of entertainment, but it's its own thing. They're a fabric of life, and so is music. So when you're thinking about all of these different things, right, don't just eliminate music from, you know, the value and how things are going up, right? The last thing that I will share with you all before I take some questions is I watched something the other day where Offset, one of my, well, he's actually my favorite Migo, in the group, the Migos, he rung the bell on Wall Street. What does that mean, Attorney Kyle? A company went public, right? A publishing company went public, meaning they're on the stock market. People can purchase shares in that company. And he rung the bell for that thing, which is very, very important and critical when companies, generally, you know, the person ringing the bell is a founder or somebody that's, you know, an integral part of that company getting to that part, that level and being successful. I said all that to say that is showing us that music on the recording side and the publishing side is very, very important. More companies are going public. If you look at the news and you're seeing all the value and you're seeing all of these companies that are growing and growing and growing, and now people are buying shares in these companies, it's showing you that the music industry is headed on an upward trajectory. And if you're working hard, if you're understanding the value of your work, like G Life said, I'm gonna keep going back to him. I don't want to transfer over my publishing if I do a work for hire. Right. He's thinking like that because he understands the value of music publishing, which can always grow and which sometimes can be attributed to stock ownership or different things like that. So it's very, very critical that you understand the economics and that you ask questions and that you surround yourself with people that's trying to help you. And that's exactly what we're doing, you know, in the BeatStars community. Next thing, right? Future topics. Lawyers, managers, and agents, right? So basically what we're doing, lawyers, managers, and agents, we're having, going to be talking about, we talk about all these different things now, right? So at this point, you know, when you get to this point, you understand all these things. Now the deals are coming in. You know about your intellectual property. You know about copyrights, right? You know about trademarks. You know about all of these different things. But at this point, now you're thinking like, okay, when I'm going in and I'm making these decisions, I have to put myself in a situation to where I'm surrounded by the proper people. So that comes when you have lawyers, right? You have managers, right? You have agents. You have all of these different things like that, right? And we want to talk about what their roles are, what do they do, how much they charge. After that, we're going to have a recap, right? So it's going to be all of the things that we talked about. And what I want to do is for everybody that's been tuning in, I'm inspired by my BeatStars Live brothers with the BeatStars Academy. We're just going to basically have a day where we talk, we chop it up, and then we do like a little quiz and we give some promo credits away for everybody that's been participating. Next thing, office hours, right? So for the office hours, like we always say, I have a few I need to answer now, but hit me at Attorney Kyle, right? You can DM me. Ask me a question, whether it's about this or you just want some, you know, guidance as to, man, I've been thinking about, you know, the recording industry. Like, can you send me some, you know, articles on like why it's growing so fast, like how I fit in with that? Like, what are some things I need to be looking at? What are you reading? Like, just stuff like that. Like, it doesn't even always have to be legal. It could just be you trying to get more knowledge. And I read a lot of stuff. So if it's something I find that relates to your question, I'll share it with you. They're from 12 to 2, so on Fridays I try to basically hit everybody back from 12 to 2. I get as many done, and if not, through the week I'll respond, or maybe the weekend or on that next Friday. So definitely get those questions in, and if you all have, you know, things that you're interested in, basically, just let me know. So that's that. Let me see if we got some questions in the chat before we get out of here. Let's see. See what we got. If y'all got questions, make sure you all you know, definitely ask questions quick if y'all got some questions or some things that y'all want to know about. Let me see. We got Cloud9 Music. By the end of the year, I'm gonna have at least 600 beats in the BeatStars Sony Music Publishing catalog. I ain't playing no games. So I could be wrong. But if I'm not mistaken, I want to say Michael Jackson's catalog in the beginning when he bought, you know, that ATV original catalog, it might have been 4,000 beats that he bought, or 4,000 songs. So to have a goal of 600 songs, that's right on point, because now you're building a catalog, you're putting all these different things in, and that's putting you in a position to, you know, truly be successful and set yourself up in the long run, right? So that's a great thing. Why are artists getting very low payments for streams? Super, super great question. And that's more so like on the recording industry side. So essentially, we talked about the history of the recording industry, and what happened in the beginning was essentially people felt like they didn't have to pay for music because they're like, I'm downloading music for free, right? So at a certain point, the tech companies had to come in and figure out, okay, how do we get people to pay for music, right? How do we make it so that people pay for music? So one of the things that they did was they came up with a system, which we all know, right, is streaming, which is like Spotify, Apple Music, and all these different things. And what happened at that place was they said, I can aggregate all of these tracks in one place, and now I can charge people a subscription to be able to listen to all this stuff without having to go in and download their favorite song or do this or do that. So what happened was that kind of took away from people wanting to like steal music. The problem with all of that was there were two tiers. So it's the people that pay, and that's the people that don't pay, right? So as we know, like depending on what subscription service you have, you may pay for one thing, but you may be on the free tier for another. So based on if people listen to you on the paid, there's a certain royalty or revenue stream that's derived from that person listening if they have a paid, subscription. That person listening with a paid subscription, you get a higher subscription or higher royalty rate. Now, the people listening that are on the free thing, you get a lower royalty rate. And the lower royalty rate on the free thing is generally based off ads. So it's revenue, that's divided up, right? So at the end of the day, a lot of these companies, tech companies, who kind of, in a sense, saved the music industry, right? I know a lot of people are hard on them, but they actually helped the music industry grow, and it's going to continue to grow with the advent of more technology. They're still figuring it out between themselves. Well, how do we make sure that we're growing, right, helping the industry grow, but we're not dying as a company? Because a lot of these companies, they lose money because it's a difficult business to figure out how to pay mechanical royalties, sound recording royalties, music publishing, and then put yourself in a position to where you can still sustain growth. Because the reason why we're here and the music industry is growing back is because there's an element of, growth sustainability or continuing to grow while still trying to manage making sure that artists are being paid. So one of the things that I challenge you all to do, and that I always do, I read as much as I can, but when there's forums of different things to voice my opinion on why artists and producers and music publishers and people that, when they come together, why you all should, be paid more, definitely speak up on it and just educate yourself on the dynamics and the economics of a streaming service. Because when you dig into it, it's kind of complex, but it's interesting to see like, okay, this is the amount of money that's being generated. This is the amount of money that's being paid out. But how can that number grow? And I think one of the ways that number will grow is by expanding in other territories, right? So when things get to China, things get to India, more people, more countries like Africa, or, some of the countries that have yet to 100% adopt streaming, it's going to continue to grow, and that should lead to more revenues for artists. Let's see what else we got. Somebody asked another question. Where does subscription money go? $9.99 when I stream a certain amount of artists. So basically what's happening is with that subscription money, and I'm speaking based on what I read. So say you pay $9.99. Say 170 million people pay $9.99. That $9.99 is basically added all into a pot. And then based on whatever amount of that is going to be paid out to artists, it's divided out based on who has the most streams. So an interesting thing that I just seen recently is Justin Bieber has hit 82 million streams per month, which is the highest Spotify listener total in the history of Spotify, right? So that's being divided up based upon who has many streams, who has the most streams. So that $9.99 is just going into a pot, and people basically is being, divvied up amongst the artists. So let's see the other questions. Let's see if we got any other good questions. Dollar. Should producers have a sole proprietorship or LLC? So let's speak about Attorney Cal, what I like, right? And it's not meant to be legal advice because you have the options to, choose what you like. For me, I think LLCs are really cool because they protect your personal assets. They separate that from your music stuff. I always say, if you got a job and you do music, the things that happen at your job shouldn't affect your music, and the things that happen with your music shouldn't affect your job. So the way that you make that formula work and make that thing happen is you separate it. And the way that you separate personal and business is LLCs, corporations, things like that, right? They protect you as long as you're using them for a proper purpose. Sole proprietorships, they don't protect personal assets, right? So if you got a sole proprietorship, it doesn't give you the same, it doesn't give you the same thing you need to be able to protect your assets like an LLC. So look into the difference between sole proprietorship and LLC, and you'll be able to see. Here we go. Is owning your masters the best alternative? Yeah, I think owning your masters is something that's very, very important. And I think at a certain point, that would be the standard for musicians, right? Producers. Like, there will be nobody who doesn't own their masters because that's just going to be the standard. But I think now where it's still kind of shaky as to should artists own their masters, I always say you should own your masters, you should own your publishing, you should own your compositions. You shouldn't be transferring those things away because, like we talked about with the economics, the value of those things are only going to grow. Next, we have one quick announcement, right? So I just want to talk about this before we jump off. We have what's called a CMR program, right? So essentially, that's our campus marketing program. So it helps college students learn about music business, expand their content creation skills, network, and boost their performance through branding and social media education. Applications, basically, you can apply until September 22nd at www.beatstars.world/CMR. Really, really cool and great opportunity. I'm actually going to be speaking at a lot of these, which is being hosted by Carly. She's super, super dope, and she had me speak at one in the past couple months. So if you are looking to be a part of something and you want to learn more about, just what we're talking about, the marketing, and you want to basically become more a part of the BeatStars community, be basically a rep, right? So you want to put that flag in the ground, definitely join, and you'll get to see me more. So definitely. Do we have any more questions, for anybody? Okay, before we get out of here, I never generally promote things, but I'm super, super excited to announce that your boy Attorney Cal has a favorite album out right now. It's not my album. If you go to attorneycal on Instagram, go to the link in my bio, right? Somebody said Kanye or Drake. I don't want to speak on that. Yeah, it's pretty fire, but Kanye is going to be dope. If you go to Attorney Cal on IG right now, go click the link in my bio. Young man coming up named Jay Bam. Super, super proud of him. I actually helped curate his artwork a little bit. So, yeah, definitely check that out. Make sure you go follow him. His name is @J_Bands, BANDZ. His album's New Beginnings, and that's what I listen to. That's what I ride to. So without further ado, folks, I just want to thank you all for tuning in, being very, very, attentive. Make sure that, like I always say, you understand that your intellectual property is no different than a piece of real estate, meaning you need to always protect that. Always protect your art. And like I said, if you need anything, definitely hit me up in the DMs. Follow me at Attorney Cal. Got those office hours. Peace.